2:17 a.m. when Ethan Carter, a 24-year-old man living alone in a small apartment in Chicago, suddenly woke up with a strange pressure in his chest like something had disturbed the air in his room. And the first thing he noticed was that his phone screen was already on, glowing in the dark with the exact same time, 2:17 a.m., without him touching it. And before he could even fully process that, he heard a slow, careful knock on his front door, not loud or random, but controlled like whoever was outside was making sure he was awake before doing anything else. And Ethan froze in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself it was just a drunk neighbor or someone at the wrong apartment. But the silence after the knock felt too deep, too heavy, like the entire building had stopped breathing. And then the knock came again, knock knock, slightly louder this time. And at the exact same moment, his hallway light outside his bedroom flickered once and shut off completely even, though he hadn't touched the switch. And that's when his calm started breaking because nothing in his apartment ever behaved like that. So he slowly sat up, feeling his heartbeat in his throat. And as he stepped out of bed barefoot onto the cold floor, he realized something even worse. The soundproof silence outside his room was unnatural. No cars, no wind, no neighbors, nothing. Just a dead quiet that felt like it was waiting for him to react. And as he walked toward the front door step by step, the wooden floor creaking under his weight sounded too loud, like the apartment itself was reacting to him. And then suddenly the knock came again, but this time it was not from outside. It was from inside the apartment, coming from the kitchen area, and Ethan stopped so fast he almost lost balance because he knew no one else was inside. He lived alone, no pets, no guests, nothing. So he grabbed a small baseball bat he kept near his bed for safety and slowly moved toward the kitchen, each step feeling heavier than the last, like the air was resisting him. And as he reached the kitchen doorway, he noticed something wrong immediately. The cabinet door on the left side was slightly open, just a few inches, even though he clearly remembered closing everything before sleeping. And then a whisper came from inside it, soft and broken, but clearly saying his name, Ethan, and his entire body went cold because the voice did not sound like it was coming from inside the cabinet alone. It sounded like it was right behind his ear, and he raised the bat shaking and said, "Who's there?" But no answer came, only silence again, thicker than before, and then slowly, very slowly, the cabinet door creaked open by itself as if something inside was pushing it outward, and Ethan stepped back as the kitchen lights started flickering rapidly like the electricity was unstable. And then he saw it, a pale hand, long fingers, slowly sliding out from the darkness inside the cabinet, not grabbing, not attacking, just feeling the air like it was searching for him. And Ethan dropped the bat in shock as the whisper came again, but now from multiple directions at once, surrounding him, saying, "You opened it. Now I can stay." And he turned and ran toward the front door, heart racing, hands shaking, but when he reached it and looked through the peephole, he saw something that made his stomach drop completely. He saw himself standing outside in the hallway, staring directly back at him with a blank expression and a slow smile forming, and that other Ethan raised his hand and knocked slowly on the door from the outside, even though Ethan was already inside, and he stumbled backward, realizing the knocking was now coming from both sides at once, inside the walls, above the ceiling, under the floor, like the apartment itself was being used as a body. And suddenly all the lights shut off completely, leaving him in total darkness except for the faint glow of his phone on the table. And then his phone rang loudly, breaking the silence. And the caller ID showed his own name, and his shaking hands picked it up without thinking. And when he put it to his ear, he heard his own voice whispering, calm and close, "Don't let me in again." And at the same moment, the front door started shaking violently like something outside was trying to force its way in, hitting it harder and harder, making the frame creak. And Ethan backed into the corner of the living room, breathing fast, unable to understand what was happening, begging silently for it to stop. And then suddenly everything went completely still. No knocking, no whispers, no vibration, just absolute silence. And for a moment he thought maybe it was over, maybe it was a hallucination or sleep paralysis, and slowly, carefully he stood up and walked toward the light switch, turned it on, and everything looked normal again. The cabinet was closed, the hallway was quiet, the door wasn't moving, and the apartment looked exactly like it always did, and Ethan laughed nervously, trying to convince himself it was just stress or lack of sleep. But when he picked up his phone to calm himself, he saw something that made his hands start shaking again. A video file had been recorded at 2:17 a.m., and he had no memory of recording anything. And when he opened it, he saw himself sleeping in bed from a corner angle that his phone should not have been able to capture. And then in the video, his sleeping body suddenly shifted, slightly, as a second version of him appeared standing next to the bed. Identical, but wrong in the way it moved, too smooth, too quiet. In a second, Ethan leaned down toward the sleeping one and whispered something into his ear while smiling, and the sleeping Ethan did not move at all. And then the video showed the second Ethan slowly turning his head toward the camera, as if he knew it was being watched. And the screen flickered for a second before showing the front door slowly unlocking from the inside. And the final frames showed the empty bed while the shadow behind it grew taller, darker, and more human-like. And then the video cut to static, and Ethan dropped the phone because from the hallway, he heard it again. The slow knock, knock, knock. But this time it was coming from inside his own bedroom wall. And as he slowly turned toward it, the lights flickered once more and went out again, and in the complete darkness, a voice right behind him finally spoke clearly, not whispering this time, but speaking directly into his ear, saying, "Now I live here." And Ethan Carter was never seen again after that night, but neighbors in the building still report that every single night at exactly 2:17 a.m., the same pattern repeats. First, the phone screens turn on by themselves, then a slow knock echoes through the hallway. And sometimes, if the building is quiet enough, people hear two sets of footsteps inside Ethan's old apartment, one walking normally and one that never stops breathing. It started at 3:09 a.m. when Daniel Brooks, a 26-year-old delivery driver from Denver, came home exhausted after a double shift, dropped his keys on the table, and collapsed on his bed still wearing half his uniform, thinking nothing in the world could disturb him at that hour. But exactly at 3:09 a.m. his phone suddenly lit up in the dark room with an unknown number calling him. And the moment he saw it, something about the timing felt wrong, too precise, like it was planned instead of random. And the phone kept ringing, slow, steady, refusing to stop, and Daniel stared at it with one eye open, annoyed and tired, until finally he picked it up and said nothing. And for a few seconds there was only breathing on the other side, heavy and close, like someone was holding the phone right against their mouth without speaking. And then a whisper came through the speaker saying, "You're in the wrong building." And before Daniel could react, the call ended instantly, leaving a sharp silence behind it that felt even louder than the ringing. And Daniel sat up slowly, confused, thinking it was some kind of prank call. But as he looked toward his apartment door, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. His front door was slightly open, just a few inches, even though he clearly remembered locking it before sleeping, and the hallway outside was completely dark, darker than normal, like the lights had died out all at once. And then came a faint sound from upstairs, dragging, slow and heavy, like something large being pulled across the floor. But Daniel lived on the second floor, and the third floor above him had been closed for maintenance for months according to the landlord, so there should have been no one up there at all. Yet the dragging sound continued, stopping, then starting again, closer this time, and Daniel slowly got out of bed, grabbed a metal flashlight from his drawer, and stepped into the hallway of his apartment, and immediately felt that something was off because the air outside his room felt colder than inside, almost like the building itself had changed temperature. And as he looked down the hallway, he saw the elevator light blinking red, even though it had never worked properly since he moved in, and the button for the third floor was glowing, which made no sense because it was supposed to be disabled. And just as he stared at it, the elevator doors slowly opened by themselves with a soft mechanical sound, revealing complete darkness inside. No reflection, no light, just a black empty space that looked deeper than it should have been. And then his phone rang again, same unknown number. 3:09 a.m. exactly. And this time Daniel didn't answer, but the phone answered itself on speaker mode, and the same voice said calmly, "Already checked in." And then the elevator lights suddenly flickered on, showing wet footprints inside leading outward directly toward Daniel's apartment. And Daniel stepped back immediately, heart pounding. whispering no, no way, as the elevator doors slowly closed again without anyone touching them, and at that exact moment his apartment door behind him slammed shut on its own, locking him inside the hallway. And from inside the apartment he heard something terrifying, his own voice humming softly, walking around his kitchen like someone was pretending to be him. And Daniel rushed to the door and tried unlocking it, but the lock didn't respond, instead clicking, unlocking itself, slowly, as if something on the other side wanted him to come back in. And when he looked through the peephole, he saw something standing inside his apartment. Hallway that shouldn't have been possible. A floating hotel key card turning slowly in the air, labeled 309. And the moment he saw it, all the hallway lights outside his apartment turned off at once, plunging everything into total darkness. And the only sound left was knocking. But not from his door, from inside his apartment walls, rhythmic and slow, like someone trapped between the structure itself. And Daniel ran toward the living room, turning on every light switch, but nothing worked, and his TV suddenly turned on by itself, showing a live camera feed of his own hallway. But the angle was wrong. It was filmed from above like someone was watching him from the ceiling, and then the feed changed to a hotel room labeled Room 309. Empty at first, but then a man appeared sitting on the bed, and slowly that man looked up at the camera, and it was Daniel himself, smiling in a way he never smiled in real life, whispering, "You finally came back." And Daniel dropped the remote immediately, backing away as the TV screen flickered violently, and the apartment temperature dropped again, colder than before, and suddenly the bedroom door behind him changed, shifting shape and texture until it was no longer a normal door, but a heavy hotel door with a brass number plate reading 309, and the hallway outside his apartment was gone completely, replaced by a long, endless hotel corridor with flickering lights, peeling wallpaper, and identical doors stretching forever in both directions, and every single door had a number except his, because his door was glowing softly with the number 309, and from the TV static behind him came a voice repeating, "Don't leave the room, don't leave the room," over and over. And Daniel turned around slowly to see the TV, now showing the apartment again, but empty, except for footsteps walking inside it that matched his own perfectly. And then the hotel phone mounted on the wall of his apartment rang loudly at exactly 3:09 a.m. again, and against every instinct Daniel picked it up, and the voice on the other end said calmly, "Checkout time is never," and immediately the walls of his apartment started shifting like fabric being stretched, turning his home into a hotel room. The furniture changing shape, the bed becoming smaller and more rigid, the mirror turning into a one-way glass window, reflecting something behind him that he couldn't see clearly, and Daniel realized in pure horror that he was never actually living in an apartment at all, because every night at 3:09 a.m. he was checking in a room 309 and forgetting it by morning, and the phone line whispered one final thing, "You always return." And then the hotel door labeled 309 slowly opened from the outside, without any force, and standing in the hallway was Daniel again, holding the same key card, smiling softly. And he said this time, "Don't wake up." And as Daniel backed away shaking, the lights flickered one last time and went out completely, and the only thing left in the darkness was the sound of a hotel bell ringing and footsteps entering the room, slowly, calmly, as if someone had just checked in again. It started with a warning that appeared on an old, almost forgotten horror forum at 3:31 a.m., written without a username, without a profile, without replies, just a single sentence that looked more like a command than a post. "If your mirror shows something behind you after 3:33 a.m., don't turn around." And Lucas Bennett, a 27-year-old night security guard working alone in a nearly empty office building in Seattle, only read it because he was trying to stay awake during a boring shift. But something about that post felt off, like it was not written for entertainment, but for survival. And as he sat in the dim security room surrounded by flickering monitors, he glanced at the clock and saw 3:32 a.m. And for some reason the air in the room suddenly felt colder, even though nothing had changed, and every monitor showed empty hallways. But when Lucas looked at the large wall mirror behind him that was used to check blind spots in the security room, he noticed his reflection sitting, normally at the desk. But in the reflection, the hallway behind him looked different, darker, longer, and at the far end of it stood a shape that did not belong there. And when he quickly turned around, the hallway behind him was empty. But when he turned back to the mirror, the shape was now closer, and the reflection of Lucas was no longer matching his movements. And at exactly 3:33 a.m., every monitor in the room shut off at once, leaving only the mirror lit by emergency glow and the reflection. Inside, it slowly turned its head toward him, even though Lucas had not moved at all, and the reflection whispered through the glass, "Don't turn around, just watch." And Lucas froze because the voice did not come from speakers or the room. It came from inside his head, and the reflection stood up slowly while the real Lucas stayed seated, and behind the reflection another figure began forming, taller, darker, like something standing just behind the mirror's surface, and Lucas slowly backed away from the desk, his heartbeat getting louder, but every step he took made the mirror reflection step closer instead of farther, like distance meant nothing inside it. And then the hallway intercom suddenly crackled with static, and a voice said, "Security breach detected on floor 3, even though floor 3 had been permanently closed for months." And Lucas grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the hallway, but immediately noticed something wrong. The emergency lights were blinking slower than before, like time itself was being stretched, and every office door was slightly open even though he remembered locking them. And the farther he walked, the more the reflections appeared on random surfaces, glass frames, windows, even the polished floor tiles, all showing him walking slightly differently than he actually was. And when he reached the end of the hallway, he saw a standing mirror placed in the middle of the corridor, completely out of place, facing him directly, and in it he saw himself again, sitting at the security desk, even though he was standing in the hallway. And behind that seated version of him stood another figure, closer than before, its face completely dark, and Lucas turned immediately. But the hallway behind him was now longer, like it had stretched, and the mirror had multiplied, appearing at both ends of the corridor, and his radio suddenly turned on by itself, saying, "Subject has entered reflection zone." And Lucas started walking back toward the security room faster. But every step he took caused the hallway to subtly change, doors shifting positions, lights flickering into different colors, until he realized he was no longer walking in a normal building, but inside a repeating structure that rearranged itself every time he blinked. And when he finally reached the security room door, it was gone, replaced by a blank reflective wall. And in that wall, he saw his reflection standing on the other side, smiling calmly. And the reflection raised its hand and tapped on the glass, even though there was no glass there, and Lucas backed away slowly as the wall began to ripple like water. And then the reflection inside stepped forward as if crossing through space, and a crack formed in the air itself, like the surface of reality breaking. And from inside the crack came a pale hand pressing outward, stretching the wall like fabric. And Lucas ran in panic back down the hallway. But every direction he turned, a mirror appeared closer each time, reflecting him from different angles, some mirrors showing him standing still while others showed him already running. And then his phone rang at 3:33 a.m. again, even though the time had not changed, and the caller ID showed unknown. And when he answered, he heard his own voice calmly saying, "Already looked," and the call ended immediately, and the mirrors around him began to flicker faster, showing different versions of him, some scared, some smiling, some completely motionless. And Lucas realized the terrifying truth. The mirrors were not reflecting reality. They were replacing it, and every reflection was becoming more real than the original. And suddenly the floor beneath him turned glossy like glass, and his feet started sinking slightly into it, like the building was turning into a mirror world layer by layer. And from every reflective surface around him the same voice spoke at once, saying, "We only needed you to look once." And Lucas ran blindly through the hallway, but every step he took changed the environment completely. Walls becoming mirrors, ceilings showing upside-down versions of himself watching him, and doors opening into endless reflective corridors, until he reached the security room again, but inside it was already occupied by another version of him sitting calmly at the desk, watching the monitors, and that version turned slowly and said, Your shift ended when you looked, and Lucas tried to speak, but no sound came out. And when he looked at his hands, they were turning translucent like glass, forming cracks inside them. And the mirror on the wall behind the duplicate version of him lit up again, showing the original security room empty, except for a shadow standing behind the chair, slowly growing taller. And Lucas realized he was not being replaced suddenly, but overwritten slowly, like a reflection becoming the original. And he tried to run, but his legs were now partially reflective, making every movement feel delayed, and the final thing he saw was every mirror in the building turning on at the same time, showing thousands of versions of him trapped inside each one, all smiling differently, all whispering the same thing, "Don't look away now." And at exactly 3:34 a.m., the building's entire reflection system locked. And somewhere deep inside the surveillance logs, a final message appeared. Subject fully integrated into mirror network, and Lucas Bennett was never seen again in the physical world, but security footage still occasionally shows a man sitting at the desk during night shifts, smiling at the mirrors, waiting for someone else to look at them after 3:33 a.m.